So as I mentioned, it's absolutely one of my, it's a subject that's intrigued me for a long time, and I hope that it'll do the same for you after you hear a little bit about it. So why is this a timely topic? This past year, 2020, was the first ever World Neglected Tropical Diseases Day. It recognized both achievements and challenges towards elimination of neglected tropical diseases. Onchocerciasis is one of those diseases, so it's timely to present an overview of that disease. Onchocerciasis is a potentially devastating eye and skin disease caused by the insect-borne filarial nematode Onchocerca volvulus. It's the second leading cause of infectious blindness worldwide. Every year, about 40,000 individuals become severely visually handicapped by the disease. And I became intrigued with it when I saw something like this during my fellowship in uveitis. First, a bit of historical background. In 1875, the British naval surgeon John O'Neill provided the first recorded signs of onchocerciasis. He described intensely pruritic skin papules, locally called craw-craw, in natives of the Gold Coast of West Africa. Microscopic examination revealed mobile microfilariae. Later, these worms became known as Onchocerca volvulus. The term onchocercus was derived from the Greek words oncho, which means hook, and cercos, which means tail. The term volvulus was derived from the Latin term volvere, which means to twist. About 1915, Robles and co-worker Pacheco Luna, both of whom were Guatemalan ophthalmologists, noted that eye disease can be associated with the skin abnormalities described by O'Neill. And today, onchocerciasis is called Robles disease in Latin America. Then, in the 1920s, Blacklock, a British professor of tropical medicine, pieced together the mode of transmission of onchocerciasis when he was working in Sierra Leone. However, it wasn't until the 1950s that onchocerciasis received widespread attention and that its control was addressed. Humans are the only definitive host for O. volvulus. The worm is transmitted between humans through the bite of female simulian flies, which are also known as black flies. Simulian flies breed near rapidly flowing rivers and streams because their larvae are aquatic and require highly oxygenated water. Thus, onchocerciasis, which is potentially binding, is commonly called river blindness. Female simulian flies require a blood meal for ovulation. If the blood meal is obtained from a human infected with O. volvulus, the fly ingests O. volvulus microfilariae along with blood. Well, after ingestion, during 6 to 10 days, the microfilariae develop into 3 stages of larvae. During another blood meal, stage 3 larvae are injected into subcutaneous connective tissues where they reside in nodules termed onchocercomas. There, the larvae develop into adult worms, the macrofilariae, in 6 to 12 months. So keep in mind that the adult worms are the macrofilariae and the immature worms are the microfilariae. Usually, nodules contain 2 or 3 adult female macrofilariae that live 13 to 14 years and produce 1 to 3,000 microfilariae every day for 9 to 11 years. Adult male macrofilariae constantly migrate subcutaneously between nodules to mate. Microfilariae usually dwell in the skin and lymphatics, less often in the eye, and very occasionally in blood, urine, and/or sputum. They die in 6 to 30 months if they aren't ingested by a black fly. The adult O. volvulus is a white thread-like worm. Females can be nearly 40 inches long. All O. volvulus worms in all life cycle stages contain Wolbachia bacteria, which are obligate mutualistic endosymbionts. These intracellular bacteria are transmitted transovarially and are essential for O. volvulus viability. And that's another point to keep in mind. All O. volvulus, both micro and macrofilariae, require the Wolbachia bacteria in all stages. in order to survive. And shortly I'll talk about the significance of that. Well, the clinical manifestations of onchocerciasis primarily occur with the death of microfilariae. After initial infection, there's a latent interval of 6 months to 2 years until a clinically significant number of microfilariae die. As mentioned, onchocerciasis affects the skin, eyes, and lymphatic system. Severity ranges widely. Most infected individuals have troublesome pruritus and skin pathology and no impairment of vision. However, the skin pathology can cause social stigma due to its disfigurement. Disfiguring skin pathology occurs in about 70% of infected individuals. Intriguingly, a small minority of afflicted individuals never have any signs or symptoms. In lightly infected individuals, pruritus is the most common early manifestation and may be the only manifestation. The pruritus ranges in severity and may occur anywhere on the body. Of course, onchosarcomas are present, but most, unlike the ones that you see on this slide, are small, deep, and not palpable. With more severe infections, a pruritic papular rash occurs anywhere on the body. Glycanification may ensue, and after several years, skin depigmentation may occur. Eventually, atrophy causes skin to wrinkle and hang and results in leonine facies and so-called hanging groin. A notably severe onchodermatitis, that's termed sauda, from the Arabic word for black, occurs in a few disparate areas, namely Yemen, Sudan, Guatemala, and Ecuador. Sauda usually involves one limb, which develops dark skin and other stigmata. Lymph nodes draining any area of onchodermatitis, whether or not sauda, may become firm and discrete, but usually are not obstructed, painful, or tender. Ocular manifestations occur late and afflict about 5% of infected people. Probably most microfilariae enter the eye by direct invasion. Dead microfilariae, excuse me, let me just make sure I'm on the right slide here. Here we go. Dead microfilariae in the cornea are surrounded by inflammatory infiltrates and appear as punctate, ill-defined opacities, which usually clear. In more advanced disease, sclerosing keratitis develops. Anterior uveitis and its sequelae occur with varying severity. A spectrum of chorioretinal changes may occur, and they predominantly affect the posterior pole. However, macular function usually is preserved until late. RPE atrophy and its sequelae predominate. Retinitis, which usually is not severe, subretinal fibrosis, and optic neuritis occur much less frequently. Vitreoretinal abnormalities also may occur. Well, both onchocercal dermatitis and keratitis are due to the host's immune responses to onchocercal antigens and to Wolbachia, all of which become exposed when the filariae die. The cause of the chorioretinitis and optic neuritis are not entirely clear. The chorioretinitis probably is partially attributable to an autoimmune process, as suggested by cross-reactivity between some RPE and parasite proteins. There's a balance between pro- and anti-inflammatory regulation of the immune response of the host, and that balance is modulated by the host's genetic background and prenatal exposure to ovolvulus. Differences in these host factors probably explain the diversity of clinical outcomes of onchocerciasis. IgE and IgG4 production are particularly prominent in onchocerciasis, and they exemplify this pro- and anti-inflammatory balance. Eosinophils are a major effector of antibody-dependent killing of filariae, and thus are pro-inflammatory, whereas IgG4 may block IgE-mediated bystander tissue damage, thereby damping inflammation. Deposition of immune complexes might also contribute to inflammatory tissue damage. Except in sauda, a hallmark of the cellular response is a diminution of T helper 1 and 2 responses. The mechanism is not known. In contrast, sauda is associated with and may be attributable to a hyperreactive T helper 2 response. Wolbachia are essential for the development of sclerosing keratitis by inducing neutrophil and macrophage infiltration and activation. And this slide is for all of you who fell asleep during all of that immunology. So a presumptive diagnosis of onchocerciasis is made on the basis of characteristic dermal and of present ocular features. A definitive diagnosis is made by visualizing the parasite in an excised nodule, a skin snip, the eye, or rarely in body fluids. Antibody and antigen detection are used primarily to detect preclinical and low-level infection. Also, there's a DNA probe that's superior to immunoassays because of its higher positive and negative predictive values. Well, worldwide, approximately 20.9 million people have onchocerciasis, and about 99% of those live in 30 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The disease also is spread to Yemen. Furthermore, it has occurred in 6 countries in Latin America. DNA analysis of ovovirus suggests that infected slaves from Africa brought the disease to Latin America, where surrogate black fly vectors allowed it to persevere. There are geographic differences in the disease that are attributed to many factors, including variations in the parasite, the vector, and host. For example, in West Africa, in forest areas, there's a higher prevalence of infection, but less severe ocular disease and less blindness than in savanna areas. In hyperendemic areas in West Africa, initial infection with ovovolus usually occurs during the first year of life. As many as 90,000 microfilariae may be transmitted to a single individual during 1 year. Without intervention, the intensity of infection increases with age, and a body load can reach 150 million worms. The more intense the infection, the greater the likelihood of vision impairment. In the late 1980s, just prior to initiation of widespread distribution of the drug ivermectin, which is the current mainstay of therapy, the World Health Organization estimated that in the worst affected areas in Africa, 10% of the total population and half of the population over 40 years of age were blind from onchocerciasis. Well, onchocerciasis not only impacts the afflicted individual, it also has a broader socioeconomic impact on entire communities due to the associated vision impairment. Worldwide, about 1.15 million people are severely visually handicapped by the disease. And as mentioned, that fate strikes about 40,000 additional individuals every year. Typically, the disease severity impairs vision in middle life, which is the time in life when individuals have major responsibility for supporting their families. Furthermore, in Africa, the life expectancy of blind individuals is 2/3 that of sighted individuals, and death usually occurs within 10 years. Villages with blindness rates over 5% are not sustainable, and onchocerciasis has led to abandonment of entire villages. Usually the villages are located along rivers, and often there's no other arable land readily available. In Central West Africa, there's been a cycle of migration back and forth between hyperendemic river valleys and barren hills. Even without vision impairment, due to other sequelae, onchocerciasis is associated with poor school performance, an elevated school dropout rate, low productivity, low income, and elevated health costs. Determination of endemicity is essential to determine the effectiveness of mass treatment programs. The most widely used method to assess endemicity is simple, low-tech, and low-cost. It involves palpation for onchocercomas in a random sample of 30 men. In areas endemic for ovovolus, the prevalence of palpable onchocercomas is about half the prevalence of positive skin snips. Thus, finding nodules in 3 of 30 men suggests that nodule prevalence is about 10% and that the prevalence of onchocerciasis is about 20%. Well, theoretically, onchocerciasis could be treated by surgical removal of all nodules. However, less than 2/3 of nodules are palpable. Nodulectomy campaigns were conducted in Guatemala and Mexico for over 50 years without success in controlling ovovolus. The earliest pharmacological mainstay of treatment was diethylcarbamazine. It's an oral microfilariacide, not a macrofilariacide. And remember, microfilariae are the immature worms, and macrofilariae are the adult worms, and adult females release 1,000 to 3,000 microfilariae daily for 9 to 11 years. Furthermore, The Mazzotti reaction is a potentially, furthermore, diethylcarbamazine has severe adverse side effects, including the Mazzotti reaction. The Mazzotti reaction is a potentially severe, life-threatening immune response to antigens when exposed to the exposed filariae die. Suramin also has been used, and it is a macro and microfilaricide, but it must be given intravenously repeatedly, and it has a very narrow therapeutic window. Currently, as mentioned, the mainstay of therapy is ivermectin, which was derived from a bacterial fermentation product found in soil near a Japanese golf course in 1975. Its development led to the Nobel Prize. Ivermectin came into medical use in 1981, but it wasn't widely used to treat ovolvulus until about 1990. It's an oral microfilaricide and is well tolerated. Its most concerning side effect is severe postural hypotension, which is rare. A single dose of ivermectin reduces microfilariae in skin by 98 to 99% after 1 to 2 months and temporarily prevents release of microfilariae from female ovolvulus. Multiple annual doses have a modest permanent sterilizing effect on ovolvulus and can reduce its life expectancy by 50%. Plus, ivermectin treats intestinal worms, scabies, and head lice, and it's rumored to increase libido, all of which enhance its acceptability. However, because ivermectin is a microfilaricide and not a macrofilaricide, in order to cure an individual, the drug must be given repeatedly for 15 years until all female worms cease reproduction and their last brood of 1,000 to 3,000 microfilariae die. Furthermore, in areas where black fly breeding sites dry up seasonally, timing of treatment is critical because ivermectin has a short half-life of less than a day. To be most effective, ivermectin administration must coincide with maximal ovolvulus transmission. Ivermectin kills ovolvulus and other helminths by binding to and preventing closure of glutamate and GABA-gated chloride ion channels in nerve and muscle cell membranes. The resultant chloride ion influx through the membranes causes hyperpolarization, which leads to muscle paralysis and slow death of the worm. Slow death minimizes resultant inflammation and thus minimizes the likelihood of a Mazzotti reaction. Due to the high degree of safety of ivermectin, the drug is distributed by community health workers to entire communities, except for pregnant or lactating women and children less than 5 years old or less than 15 kilograms. Its safety in those groups is unclear. It's administered once a year in Africa and biannually in Latin America. In 1987, Merck and Company, which developed the drug, promised to provide for free as much of the drug as needed for as long as needed. To oversee donation of the drug, Merck founded the Mectizan Donation Program, which is housed by the Task Force for Global Health in Decatur, Georgia. The task force facilitates distribution of the drug by building partnerships between countries and organizations which provide the funds and means for distribution. Very fortunately, in the early 1990s, it was noted that the Mazzotti reaction and encephalopathy may occur when ivermectin is administered to individuals co-infected with Loa loa, and at least 31,000 individuals are co-infected. Loa loa is a filarial parasite transmitted by bites of the chrysops fly, and loiasis is endemic in rainforest areas of West and Central Africa. In those areas, individuals are screened for Loa loa before being given ivermectin, which of course incurs time and expense. That time and expense could be greatly diminished with a recently developed device called a cell scope, if production of the scope could be scaled up and its availability made affordable. This small device attaches to an iPhone and has a slit for insertion of a slide with a blood sample. Software analyzes a 5-second video recorded by the iPhone and thus detects the characteristic wiggling motion of Loa loa. Testing takes about 2 minutes, and the estimated false negative rate is less than 1 in 10 million individuals. Technician training time is about 1 hour. Well, back to ivermectin. Models indicate that resistance to ivermectin could occur over 30 years. So development of alternative drugs is important and is occurring. The first new treatment for river blindness since the development of ivermectin is moxidectin, which was approved by the FDA in 2018. Its origin and mechanism of action are similar to those of ivermectin. And like ivermectin, it's administered orally, is well tolerated, but unfortunately, it's also just a microfluoricide and not a macrofluoricide. However, moxidectin is more effective than ivermectin in reducing skin microfilariae, and its greater clinical effectiveness could increase participation in treatment campaigns. Annual moxidectin treatment is equivalent to biannual ivermectin treatment in reducing ovovolus microfilariae load. Furthermore, moxidectin's longer half-life of 20 to 43 days versus less than 1 day for ivermectin means that the timing of moxidectin treatment does not need to be as precise as that of ivermectin in areas where black fly breeding sites dry up seasonally. Unfortunately, like ivermectin, there's no donor for moxidectin. Also, moxidectin's safety in both children and pregnant or lactating women is not clear. Its safety with low co-infection also is not clear, and its safety and efficacy after long-term treatment are not clear. Probably the most promising tactic to eliminate onchocerciasis is use of antibiotics to kill Wolbachia. Remember, both the micro and macrofilariae require the Wolbachia bacteria for survival. Doxycycline kills Wolbachia, and this is therefore it's both a micro and a macrofilaricidal. However, although doxycycline is an effective treatment for individuals, it's not an effective community-directed intervention because of the long required regimen of 4 to 6 weeks. Furthermore, it's contraindicated in pregnancy and in children less than 8 years old. The quest for an anti-Wolbachia treatment that is compatible with mass administration is underway under the auspices of the Anti-Wolbachia Consortium, which was founded in 2007 by the Gates Foundation and is based at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. Well, development of a vaccine or other prophylaxis has been elusive, and individuals cured of onchocerciasis do not acquire immunity to reinfection. However, sera of the rare individuals who appear to be resistant to infection is being studied to identify some vaccine targets. During the past 30 years, control efforts have expanded dramatically and effectively due to joint efforts of the World Health Organization, other United Nations agencies, the World Bank, and a growing coalition of non-governmental organizations. There have been 2 strategies for control: vector control and chemotherapy with ivermectin. Vector control has 2 major limitations. First, to be effective, it must be continued for a long time, at least 15 years. Second, treated sites can be invaded by black flies from other areas. Vector control first was tried in the 1950s in Kenya. There, onchocerciasis was eliminated by treating black fly breeding sites with DDT. But DDT use stopped when its ecologic consequences were realized and black flies bearing ovovolus returned. Subsequently, from 1974 until 2002, the World Health Organization administered the Onchocerciasis Control Program, or OCP. It initially organized aerial spraying of ecologically appropriate insecticides against black fly larvae in 11 West African countries. In 1989, large-scale distribution of ivermectin via mobile means was added. The OCP prevented blindness in about 600,000 individuals. It also allowed the resettlement of nearly 97,000 square miles of abandoned arable land, capable of feeding 17 million people annually. Later, from 1995 through 2015, the African Program for Onchocerciasis Control, or APOC, focused on controlling onchocerciasis in the African countries endemic for ovovolus, but not targeted by the OCP And APOC replaced mobile dispensing of ivermectin with self-sustaining community-based treatment. It's supplemented with vector control where appropriate. APOC was replaced with the Expanded Special Project for Elimination of Neglected Tropical Diseases, or ESPN, which was launched in 2016 and is ongoing. In addition to onchocerciasis, it is tackling 4 other high-burden neglected tropical diseases. Unlike the OCP and APOC, both of which sought to control onchocerciasis, ESPN seeks elimination. Elimination is defined as, quote, reduction of ovovolus infection and transmission to the extent that interventions can be stopped, but post-intervention surveillance is still necessary, end quote. Well, on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean, in 1992, the ongoing Onchocerciasis Elimination Program of the Americas was initiated to eliminate onchocerciasis throughout the 6 affected countries in the Americas via biannual large-scale ivermectin treatment. The disease actually was eliminated in Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, and Guatemala in 2013, 14, 15, and 16, respectively. It has yet to be eliminated in Brazil and Venezuela. In Yemen, there's been a program to eliminate onchocerciasis since 1992. Interestingly, in that country, ovovolus causes SAUDA, but it doesn't cause any eye pathology. Evidence indicates that elimination of onchocerciasis worldwide is feasible, but there are major challenges to accomplishing that, including those that are listed on this slide. So the battle against ovovolus is ongoing, and there's no immediate end in sight. Thus, onchocerciasis will remain a world-neglected tropical disease for the indeterminate future. Currently, there are at least 125 million people who are at risk for infection, which means that there are at least 6.6 million individuals at risk for severe visual impairment from ovovolus. Well, thank you for your attention, and be glad to welcome any questions or comments.